For 28 years, my father looked at me and saw a sin. He called me the living proof of my mother's betrayal, a walking reminder of an affair that never actually happened. When I finally took the DNA test, I thought I was buying my freedom with science. I expected to prove him wrong. Instead, I proved that the truth was far worse than his lie, and that some secrets are buried deep enough to rot an entire family tree. The sign welcoming drivers to Briar Glen, North Carolina, had not changed in 20 years. It still boasted about being a historic community with deep roots, a phrase that always tasted bitter in my mouth. I drove past the sprawling oaks and the meticulously kept lawns of the historic district, feeling the familiar tightening in my chest. It was a physical reaction, a reflex honed over 3 decades of walking on eggshells. I was 33 years old. I had a career, an apartment in the city, and a life that was entirely my own. Yet, as my tires crunched onto the gravel driveway of the house where I grew up, I felt like a child again. I felt like the problem. I was back for a milestone dinner. My parents were celebrating their 40th wedding anniversary. It was the kind of event where attendance was mandatory, where absence would be treated as an act of war. I had spent the last 5 years cultivating a polite distance. I called on holidays. I sent cards. I visited for exactly 48 hours at Christmas and never stayed long enough for the cracks to show. But tonight was different. Tonight, I was determined to prove something to myself. I wanted to prove that I could sit in the same room as my father, Gordon Hughes, and not let him make me bleed. The house smelled the same as it always did, a mixture of lemon polish and old paper. My mother, Marianne, met me at the door. She looked tired. Her smile was bright, but it did not reach her eyes. She hugged me, and her frame felt fragile against mine. "You look good, Alice," she said, pulling back to inspect me. "City life suits you." "Thanks." "Mom," I said, "you look great." She waved a hand, dismissing the compliment. "Your father is in the den. Everyone else is already here." By everyone else, she meant my older brother, David, and his wife, Sarah, along with a few of my parents' oldest friends. I walked into the den, my heels clicking on the hardwood. Gordon was standing by the fireplace, holding a glass of scotch. He looked the part of the patriarch. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with silver hair that he combed back severely. When he saw me, his eyes did not light up. They assessed me. "Alice," he said, "you made it. I told you I would come." "Dad," I replied, keeping my voice steady. He took a sip of his drink. "Traffic can be unpredictable. You never know what is going to hold you up." It was a nothing comment, but with Gordon, there was always a subtext. He was telling me that he had expected me to fail, to be late, to give him a reason to be disappointed. I moved past him to greet David. My brother was the golden child, the one who looked exactly like Gordon. He had the same jawline, the same heavy brow. I had neither. I had fair hair and softer features. For as long as I could remember, that physical difference had been the evidence Gordon used against me. Dinner was served in the formal dining room. The table was set with the good china, the pieces Marianne only brought out when she wanted to impress someone. We ate roast beef and glazed carrots, the conversation sticking safely to local politics and the weather. I focused on my food, counting the minutes until I could politely excuse myself. Then, the lull happened. It was that moment in every dinner party where the conversation naturally pauses. Gordon set his fork down. He looked around the table, a smile playing on his lips that did not look benevolent. It looked amused. "You know," he said, his voice carrying easily to the far end of the table. "I was looking at old photos the other day. It is funny how genetics work. David here, he is a Hughes through and through. You can see my grandfather in his nose." He paused. The room went very quiet. I stopped chewing. I knew what was coming. I had heard variations of this speech for 28 years. "Then there is Alice," Gordon continued, turning his gaze on me. He did not look angry. He looked calm. He looked factual. You really have to wonder sometimes. It is like nature played a joke. Or maybe not nature, maybe just circumstance. You do not have a drop of Hugh's blood in you, do you, kiddo? He said it with a laugh, as if he were teasing, as if it were a fond family joke. The silence that followed was suffocating. David stared at his plate. Sarah took a sudden interest in her water glass. The family friends offered polite, frozen smiles, pretending they had not heard the implication. They pretended they did not know that Gordon Hughes had spent nearly 3 decades telling anyone who would listen that his daughter was the product of an affair. He never said it outright in mixed company. He danced around it. He weaponized the doubt. I looked at him. I wanted to scream. I wanted to flip the table. But I did neither. I saw the satisfaction in his eyes. He wanted a reaction. He wanted me to be the emotional, unstable daughter so he could be the long-suffering father who raised another man's child. I picked up my wine glass. I took a slow sip. I set it down. Genetics are funny things. Dad, I said. My voice did not shake. Gordon's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, then returned. Indeed they are. Marianne stood up abruptly. Her chair scraped loudly against the floor. Who wants pie? She asked. Her voice was too high, too bright. I made apple and cherry. Alice, you love the cherry. I looked at my mother. She was not looking at Gordon. She was looking at me, and her expression was not one of embarrassment. It was fear. Pure, unadulterated fear. Her hands were trembling as she reached for the empty serving platter. The china rattled against the wood. I had seen my mother embarrassed by my father's cruelty before. I had seen her apologize for him 1,000 times. But this was different. She looked terrified. I stood up to help her. I will help you with the dessert. Mom. We walked into the kitchen. The swinging door shut behind us, muting the murmur of the dining room. Marianne gripped the counter. She was breathing shallowly. He is just in a mood, she whispered. Do not pay him any mind. It is not just a mood. Mom, I said, he has been saying this since I was 5 years old. She squeezed her eyes shut. Please, Alice, not tonight. I watched her hands shaking as she reached for the pie server. A thought struck me, sharp and sudden. The fear in her eyes wasn't because Gordon was being mean. It was because she thought he might be right, or worse. She knew something she wasn't saying. I decided to push, just a little. I was thinking about doing one of those genealogy tests. I said casually, you know, the DNA kits, just to see the breakdown. Maybe it would shut him up. The pie server clattered onto the counter. Marianne spun around. No, she said. It was a command. It was sharp and desperate. Why not? I asked. They are unreliable, she said. Her words rushing out. They sell your data. You do not want that. It is nonsense. Alice. Just nonsense. She picked up the server again. Her knuckles white. She was terrified. And for the first time, I realized that the mystery of my paternity wasn't just a weapon my father used to hurt me. It was a secret my mother was desperate to keep buried. The rest of the dinner passed in a blur. I left as early as I could, claiming I had an early morning meeting I needed to prepare for. I didn't go to the hotel where I had booked a room. Instead, I drove to the one place in Briar Glen where I felt safe. The Night Owl Diner was a staple of the town. It was where the shift workers from Briar Glen Regional Medical Center went when they got off duty. I walked in and saw Tessa Lane sitting in a booth near the back. Tessa and I had been best friends since kindergarten. She was the only person who knew the full extent of Gordon's psychological warfare. She was wearing her scrubs, her dark hair pulled back in a messy bun. She saw my face and waved a waitress over immediately. Coffee, she said to the waitress, and a slice of the chocolate cake. She waited until I sat down. How bad was it? She asked. The usual, I said. He told the table I do not have Hugh's blood. Mom almost dropped the fine china. Tessa sighed, shaking her head. He is a monster. Alice, I have told you this for 20 years. I know, I said, but tonight was different. I mentioned a DNA test to Mom. She panicked. Tessa, she actually panicked. Tessa paused, her coffee cup halfway to her mouth. Panicked how? Like I had threatened to burn the house down. She shut it down immediately. Tessa set the cup down. She looked around the diner, then leaned in closer. Her voice dropped. Alice, you know I work in records now, right? At the hospital? I nodded. Yeah. There are stories, she said. Old stories. From back in the late 80s. What kind of stories? I asked. Administration stuff. She said, nothing I can prove. But the older nurses, the ones who are retired now, they sometimes talk about how chaotic things were back then. The record keeping wasn't digital. It was all paper logs and wristbands. There were rumors about files that went missing, records that did not match perfectly. I felt a chill go down my spine. Are you saying my file might be wrong? I am saying that if your dad is that convinced, and your mom is that scared, maybe the answer isn't as simple as an affair. Tessa said, maybe you should take that test. Not to prove him wrong, but just to know. I sat there, watching the steam rise from my coffee. I had spent my entire life being defined by a story I didn't write. The affair child, the mistake, the outsider. I ordered the kit on my phone right there in the booth. I selected the expedited shipping. I told myself it was just for peace of mind. I told myself I just wanted to close the book on this chapter, but privately, in the quiet corners of my mind, I began drafting 2 versions of my future. In the first version, the test came back proving I was Gordon and Marianne's biological daughter. I would print it out, frame it, and slam it on the dining room table. I would watch Gordon choke on his scotch. I would demand an apology he would never give. But I would have the truth. In the second version, the test confirmed what Gordon had always said. I was the product of an affair. It would hurt. It would destroy the image of my mother as the long-suffering saint. But at least I would be free. I would know that his hatred wasn't my fault. It was just misplaced anger at a stranger. I stayed in town for a few days, ostensibly to visit with my aunt, but really to wait for the kit to arrive at my parents' house. I was staying in the guest room, which had been my grandmother's room before she passed away 2 years ago. Gran had been the only Hughes who ever treated me with unconditional kindness. On the second afternoon, it rained, a heavy gray downpour that trapped everyone inside. Gordon was at his office in town. Marianne was at a charity luncheon. I was alone in the house. I found myself in the closet of the guest room, looking through Gran's old boxes. I wasn't looking for anything in particular, just feeling sentimental. I opened a shoebox filled with old letters and recipe cards. At the very bottom, beneath a stack of knitting patterns, I found a sealed envelope. It was thick, creamy stationery. On the front, in Gran's shaky cursive, it read, "For Alice, when you are ready." My heart hammered against my ribs. I sat down on the floor. Holding the envelope, why hadn't anyone given this to me? Gran had been gone for 2 years. I slid my finger under the flap. The seal was already broken. The glue dried and brittle. I opened it. It was empty. I turned it upside down and shook it. Nothing fell out. No letter, no money, no secret confession. I peered inside. There was a faint residue of adhesive on the inside of the paper, as if something had been taped there and then peeled away. Someone had found this envelope before me. Someone had read what was inside and decided I wasn't allowed to see it. The front door opened downstairs. I shoved the empty envelope into my pocket and stood up, my pulse racing. Alice? It was Gordon. I came downstairs, trying to compose my face. He was in the kitchen, hanging up his wet raincoat. He turned when he saw me, and his face did something that unsettled me more than his cruelty ever had. He smiled, a genuine, warm smile. "Hey, kiddo," he said. I froze. He hadn't called me kiddo since I was 4 years old. "I saw your car in the drive," he said. "The rear tire looks a little low. I have the compressor in the garage. I can top it off for you if you want." I stared at him. This was the man who, 2 nights ago, had publicly questioned my DNA. Now he was offering to fill my tires? "That is okay. Dad," I said slowly, "I can do it." "Nonsense," he said, grabbing his keys. "I do not mind. I want you to be safe on the drive back to the city." He walked past me, patting me on the shoulder. It was a clumsy, heavy gesture. It felt like a performance, It felt like he was trying to buy something from me or distract me. Why now? Why the sudden shift? I went to the window and watched him in the driveway. He was crouching by my car, attaching the air hose. He looked over his shoulder at the house, scanning the windows. He looked nervous. He knows. I thought, he knows I'm asking questions. He is trying to manage me. That night, after dinner, I went into the den to look for the photo albums. I needed to see the history he had mocked. I needed to see the evidence of my exclusion. I pulled down the albums from 1989, the year I was born. I sat on the rug and flipped through the plastic-covered pages. There was David, 5 years old, holding me. There was Marianne, looking exhausted but happy. There was Gordon, standing stiffly in the corner of the frame. I looked closer at the hospital pictures. There was a photo of David as a newborn, wrapped in a blue blanket with the Briar Glen Regional logo stamped on the corner. It was a distinct logo, a pine tree inside a circle. Then I turned the page to my newborn photos. I was wrapped in a blanket too. But it was different. The pattern was a tight, waffle-knit weave. The logo was faded, but it wasn't a pine tree. It looked like a simple block letter, maybe a W or an M. I flipped back and forth. David's blanket was standard hospital issue. Mine looked different. I looked at the background of the photos. In David's pictures, the wall behind my mother's hospital bed was painted a soft, institutional green. There was a poster on the wall about breastfeeding. In my pictures, the wall was white, stark white, and through the window behind Marianne, I could see a brick wall. I knew Briar Glen Regional. I had been there for broken arms and flu shots. The maternity ward was on the 3rd floor, facing the park. There were no brick walls visible from the 3rd floor. The only wing that faced a brick wall was the old East Wing, which was used for administration and storage. Why was my mother in the East Wing? I took a picture of the photo with my phone. The discrepancy was small. Something no one would notice unless they were looking for it. But I was looking for it. Later that night, the house was dark. I was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. The silence of the countryside was heavy. Then, I heard voices. They were coming from my parents' bedroom, down the hall. They were muffled, but the tone was unmistakable. It was an argument. I crept out of bed and moved silently into the hallway. The floorboards were old, but I knew which ones creaked. I stopped outside their door. "It is done. Gordon," I heard Marianne hiss. "You promised me." "I did what I had to do," Gordon's voice replied. It was lower, rumbling. "She is asking questions. Marianne, she is digging. She knows nothing," Marianne said. "She is just reacting to you being cruel. If you would just stop pushing her." "I am not pushing her," Gordon snapped, though he kept his voice down. "I am preparing her. Do you think I want this to come out? Do you think I want the whole town to know?" "Know what?" Marianne asked. "That you are a paranoid old man? That the paperwork does not hold up?" Gordon said. His voice was strained. "If she pulls those threads, Marianne, the whole thing unravels." I held my breath. My hand was pressed against the wall. "Let it go," Marianne said, her voice breaking. "Just let it go. We have made it this far." I backed away. I retreated to my room and closed the door without a sound. The paperwork does not hold up. That wasn't about an affair. You don't have paperwork for an affair. You have paperwork for adoptions. You have paperwork for surrogacy. You have paperwork for hospital admissions. The affair child story was a lie. I had always known it was a lie in my heart, but now I knew it was a lie in fact. It was a cover, a shield protecting something else. The next morning, I packed my bag. I couldn't stay in that house another minute. I told Marianne I had an emergency at work. She looked relieved to see me go. Gordon wasn't around. He had gone to the golf course, back to his routine of avoidance. I drove to the grocery store on the edge of town to buy a bottle of water for the drive. As I walked back to my car, my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was an email notification. Subject: "Your DNA results are ready." I stopped. I stood in the middle of the parking lot, surrounded by people loading groceries and carts rattling over the asphalt. The sun was shining, bright and oblivious. I got into my car and locked the doors. The air inside was hot and stale. I sat there, staring at the screen of my phone. The email was innocent enough, just a standard notification, but it felt like a bomb. My hands hovered over the screen. I was trembling. I realized then that I wasn't afraid of seeing that Gordon was not my father. I had made peace with that possibility years ago. I wasn't afraid of the rejection. I was afraid of the blank space. I was afraid that when I opened that file, I wouldn't find a new father or a scandalous truth. I was afraid I would find that I didn't exist at all. I was afraid of discovering that my entire identity, my name, my history, my place in this world, had been assigned to me by someone else, that I was a character in a story written by two people who were trying to hide a crime. I took a breath. I tapped the screen. The page began to load. The progress bar on my phone screen filled to 100%, and the digital confetti exploded across the display. It was a cheerful animation designed to soften the blow of whatever truth was hiding beneath it. I sat in my car, the engine idling, the air conditioning blasting against the sweat that had gathered on my forehead despite the cool day. I felt a strange detachment, as if I were floating above the parking lot, looking down at the woman in the sedan who was about to dismantle her life. I scrolled down. The interface was clean, friendly, and devastating. Paternal lineage. No match. I let out a breath I did not know I was holding. It was done. The rumor was fact. Gordon Hughes was not my father. I stared at the 0% marker, feeling a cocktail of emotions I could not name. There was vindication. Certainly, he had treated me like a stranger because I was one. There was grief, too. Sharp and sudden. Mourning the relationship I had tried to force into existence for 28 years. But then I scrolled further. I expected to see the familiar map of my mother's ancestry. Marianne was proud of her lineage, a mix of French and Irish roots that she could trace back to the potato famine. I expected to see the names of second cousins I had met at reunions, the distant relatives who sent Christmas cards with pictures of golden retrievers. I frowned. The map was wrong. It showed Eastern European clusters. It showed pockets of Scandinavian DNA. I scrolled to the DNA matches section. The list populated. Parent/child. No matches. My heart skipped a beat. That made sense for Gordon. But where was Marianne? I had not tested her. But if I was her daughter, I should be seeing matches from her side of the family. I should be seeing the O'Malley cousins. I should be seeing the vast network of relatives she bragged about. I refreshed the page. First cousin/close family. Elaine Mercer. I stared at the name. Elaine Mercer. I had never heard that name in my life. I clicked on her profile. Estimated relationship, aunt, half-sister, or grandmother. She shared 25% of my DNA. I looked at her location. Silver Hollow, North Carolina. Silver Hollow was 20 miles away. It was a small, sleepy town on the other side of the ridge, the kind of place you drove through on your way to the coast but never stopped in. I sat back against the headrest, my mind racing. If Gordon was not my father, and I had no matches from Marianne's known family, then who was I? The logical part of my brain, the part that organized spreadsheets and managed crises at work, tried to find a simple explanation. Maybe Marianne had been adopted and never knew. Maybe the affair was not just a one-night stand, but a secret life involving a man from a completely different background. But deep down, in the pit of my stomach, something felt colder. This was not just a wrong branch on a family tree. This was a different tree entirely. I tapped the message button on Elaine Mercer's profile. My fingers trembled so badly I had to delete the first sentence 3 times. Hello, Elaine. I typed. My name is Alice Hughes. I just received my DNA results, and you are listed as my closest relative. I do not know what this means, but I think there is a mistake, or perhaps a story I have never been told. I live in Briar Glen. Please, if you know anything, tell me. I hit send before I could talk myself out of it. I drove back to the house in a daze. When I walked through the front door, the silence of the house felt heavy. like the air before a thunderstorm. Gordon was in the living room, watching golf. Marianne was in the kitchen, arranging flowers she had cut from the garden. I walked into the living room and stood in front of the television. Gordon looked up, annoyed. "You are blocking the putter." "Alice," he said. I looked at him. I looked at the man who had called me kiddo yesterday, the man who had offered to fill my tires while checking the windows for spies. I got the results. "Dad?" I said. He froze. He slowly set the remote down on the side table. He did not look afraid. He looked eager. "And?" he asked. "You were right." I said, "You are not my father." Gordon sat back in his recliner. A slow, wide smile spread across his face. It was not a smile of relief. It was a smile of victory. It was theatrical. Performative satisfaction. He looked like a man who had just won a bet he had been holding for 3 decades. "I knew it," he said. He slapped his knee. "I told her. For 28 years. I told her." He stood up and walked toward the kitchen, his voice booming. "Marianne, did you hear that? Alice got the proof. The science does not lie. Marianne." I followed him into the kitchen. Marianne dropped the shears. They clattered onto the counter. She turned to face us, her face draining of color until she looked like a ghost. Gordon was laughing, a harsh barking sound. "You finally have to admit it." He crowed. "You finally have to say it out loud. You stepped out on me. You brought a stranger's kid into my house and made me pay for her food and her clothes and her college." Marianne did not look at him. She looked at me. Her eyes were wide, filled with a panic that bordered on hysteria. "Alice," she whispered. "There is more. Mom," I said, watching her closely. Gordon stopped laughing. "What more could there be? She is a bastard. We established that. I am not just unrelated to him." I said to Marianne, "The test. It did not show any of your family either. No O'Malleys, no French, no Irish." The room went deadly silent. The refrigerator hummed in the corner. Marianne gripped the edge of the counter. Her knuckles were white. She looked like she was going to be sick. "That is impossible," Gordon scoffed. "That thing is broken. Of course you belong to her. You have her weak chin." "No," I said. "I have matches. Just not yours. And not hers. I matched with a family named Mercer." Marianne made a sound. It was a small, strangled whimper. She covered her mouth with her hand. Gordon looked from me to her, confusion finally clouding his arrogance. "What are you talking about?" Marianne took a step toward me. Her voice was a terrified rasp. "Alice, listen to me. That test, it does not mean what you think it means." "Then what does it mean?" I demanded. "Tell me the truth. Did you have an affair? Or am I adopted? Just tell me." Marianne shook her head violently. "No, no affair. I never touched another man. I swear it." Gordon slammed his hand on the table. "Then explain it." "I can't," Marianne cried. She looked at me with pleading eyes. "Just stop digging. Alice, please, for your own sake, leave it alone." I stared at them. My father, gloating over a victory that wasn't real. My mother, terrified of a truth she wouldn't speak. "I cannot leave it alone." I said quietly, "I am not a Hughes. I am not an O'Malley. I need to know who I am." I grabbed my keys and walked out. I couldn't breathe in that house. I drove straight to the coffee shop where Tessa and I always met. I texted her on the way. "Emergency. Meet me now." She was there 10 minutes later. Looking breathless, she slid into the booth opposite me. "What happened?" she asked. "Did he hit you?" "No," I said. "He is celebrating." I pushed my phone across the table, showing her the results. Tessa studied the screen, her medical training taking over. She scrolled, frowned, zoomed in. "No match for Gordon," she muttered. "Okay, we expected that. But, wait, where is the maternal link?" "Exactly," I said. Tessa looked up at me. "Alice, this says you are not related to either of them. I matched with a woman named Elaine Mercer." I said, "She is in Silver Hollow." Tessa sat back. "Mercer. I know that name." "You do?" "Not personally. But I have seen it in the old logs. I told you. I have been going through the archives since you told me about the blanket. She lowered her voice, leaning over the table. Alice, there is a retired administrator named Mr. Holloway. He worked at Briar Glen Regional in the 80s and 90s. He was known as the fixer, whenever there was a lawsuit threat, or a billing error, or a bad outcome. Holloway handled it. He is the one who managed the archives before everything went digital. What does that have to do with me? Tessa looked around the shop to make sure no one was listening. If you are not related to your parents, but you have a birth certificate that says you are, and you were born in that hospital, that is not an affair. Alice, that is a switch, or a theft. The words hung in the air between us. A switch. I felt a wave of nausea. They have been hiding it. I whispered, that is why the photo background was wrong. That is why my blanket was different. Tessa nodded, and that is why the hospital records are a mess. Holloway was famous for cleaning up errors. If a baby was given to the wrong family, or if something worse happened, he would be the one to bury the paper trail. My phone buzzed on the table. We both jumped. I picked it up. It was a notification from the DNA app. New message from Elaine Mercer. I opened it. My hands were shaking again. Dear Alice, I have been waiting for this possibility for 33 years. I have prayed for it, and I have feared it. I am shaking as I write this. Please, we need to meet. I am home today. Come to Silver Hollow. I live at 402 Pine Street. I will leave the light on. Elaine, she was waiting for me. I looked at Tessa. She says she has been waiting. Go, Tessa said. Go right now. But Alice, be careful. If this is what I think it is, you are walking into a lot of pain. I drove to Silver Hollow in silence. The road wound through the dense pine forest that separated our towns. Silver Hollow was smaller than Briar Glen, less wealthy, less polished. The houses were modest, set back from the road on large, overgrown lots. I found 402 Pine Street. It was a small white bungalow with a wraparound porch. The paint was peeling slightly, but the flower beds were meticulously weeded. A single light burned on the porch, just as she had promised. I parked the car. I walked up the path. Before I could knock, the door opened. A woman stood there. She was small, with gray hair pulled back in a loose bun. She wore a cardigan wrapped tightly around her frame, but it was her face that stopped me. She had my nose. She had my chin. She had the same eyes that stared back at me in the mirror every morning. Alice? She asked. Her voice was thin, trembling. Yes, I said. She let out a sob, a sound that seemed to come from the bottom of her soul. She stepped back and opened the door wide. Come in, she said. Please, come in. The house was warm and smelled of cinnamon and old books. She led me to a small living room. There were photos on the mantel. A boy. A man who must have been her husband. But there were no baby pictures. We sat on the couch. She stared at me, her eyes devouring my face. You look like my mother, she said softly. Who are you? I asked. How are we related? Elaine took a deep breath. She twisted a handkerchief in her hands. In 1989, I was pregnant, she began. My husband and I were so happy. It was a girl. We had named her Sarah. I listened, my heart pounding against my ribs. I went into labor early. She said, I went to Briar Glen Regional. It was a stormy night. The hospital was understaffed. I remember the nurses running back and forth. I remember the pain. She paused, looking at the window. They gave me something for the pain. I felt groggy. I remember pushing. I remember hearing a cry, a strong, loud cry. She looked at me, tears spilling down her cheeks, and then I passed out. When I woke up, a doctor was there. Not my doctor, a different one. He told me there had been complications. He told me my baby had stopped breathing. He told me she was gone. I felt the blood drain from my face. They told you she died? I whispered. Elaine nodded. They told me she died. They told me it was a rare defect. They recommended I not see the body. They said it would be too traumatic. They said they would handle the arrangements. I was 22. Alice, I was heartbroken, and I was medicated, and I trusted them. She reached out and touched my hand. Her skin was cool and dry, but I never felt right about it. She said I had heard her cry. She sounded so strong, and the paperwork, it never made sense. The death certificate had the wrong time. The birth weight was blank. When I asked questions, they sent a man to talk to us, a Mr. Holloway. Tessa's words echoed in my mind. The fixer. He was very kind, Elaine said bitterly, very smooth. He told us that mistakes happen in paperwork, but the medical reality was final. He told us to move on. He told us to focus on our future. She squeezed my hand. But I never moved on. I always felt like she was out there. And when I saw your name, when I saw the match, she looked at me with a hunger that broke my heart. You are 33, she said. You were born in November of 1989. Yes, I said. Alice, she whispered. I think you are my Sarah. I pulled my hand away. I stood up. I couldn't sit still. The room was spinning. If Elaine was right, I wasn't the product of a tawdry affair. I wasn't a mistake my mother made. I was a crime. I was a stolen child. Or a switched child. The implication was staggering. If I was Elaine's baby, then what happened to the Hughes baby? Did Marianne lose her child and get me as a replacement? Did Gordon know? Rage bubbled up inside me. Hot, blinding rage. Not at Gordon, not even at Marianne, but at the institution, at the hospital that had played God with two families. But then, guilt washed over me. I looked at Elaine. She was weeping silently. She had grieved a dead child for 33 years. And here I was, walking into her life, ripping that scab off, telling her that her grief was based on a lie. I do not know what to say. I stammered, You do not have to say anything. Elaine said, You are here. That is enough. We talked for hours. She showed me pictures of her son, Grant, my brother. He lived 2 towns over. He was 30. I left her house well past midnight. I promised to return. I promised to find the truth. The next morning, I went to the hospital. I walked into the records department with a cold determination. The clerk was a young woman who looked bored. I need my complete birth records, I said, including the nursing notes and the discharge summary. She typed on her computer. Name, Alice Hughes. Date of birth, November 12th, 1989. She frowned. That is on microfilm. I have to put in a request. It takes 7 to 10 business days. I do not have 10 days. I said, I am here now. I cannot help you, she said, not looking up. It is policy. You have to fill out this form and pay a fee. I filled out the form. I paid the fee. I stared at her until she stamped it. As I walked out, my phone buzzed with an email. It was from the hospital's legal department. Dear Ms. Hughes, regarding your recent inquiry into historical records, please be advised that due to privacy regulations and the age of the requested documents, an extended processing time is required. All requests must be reviewed by legal counsel prior to release. It was a form letter, but it felt targeted. They were already circling the wagons. They knew I was asking. I drove back to my parents' house to pack the rest of my things. I was done staying there. I was going to a hotel. When I pulled into the driveway, I saw 3 cars parked there. My Aunt Linda's car, my cousin Mike's truck. I walked inside. The living room was full. Gordon was holding court. He had a drink in his hand, and he looked flushed and happy. There she is, he announced as I walked in. The truth seeker. The family turned to look at me. Their faces were a mixture of pity and awkward curiosity. I was just telling Linda and Mike, Gordon said, his voice booming. Alice finally got to the bottom of it. DNA does not lie. Folks, we finally know why she never looked like me. He was doing it. He was rewriting history in real time. He was taking the data point, that I wasn't his, and cementing the narrative that I was illegitimate. He was isolating me. He was making sure that if I ever tried to tell the real story, I would just look like a desperate woman trying to cover up her mother's shame. Marianne sat in the corner, staring at the floor. She said nothing. That is not what happened, I said, my voice cutting through the room. Gordon laughed. Oh, come on, Alice. Do not be a sore loser. Your mother made a mistake. We all know it. I looked at him. I really looked at him. He didn't care about the truth. He cared about being right. He cared about winning. I grabbed my suitcase from the hallway. Think what you want. Gordon, I said, but you are going to regret this. I walked out. I drove to the hotel in Briar Glen and checked in. I sat on the bed, feeling completely alone. I had no father. My mother was a wall of silence. My new family was a grieving stranger. My phone pinged. It was a text from Elaine. I forgot to show you this last night. I found it in my memory box. An image downloaded. It was a photo of a newborn baby's wrist. The skin was wrinkled and pink. Around the tiny wrist was a plastic hospital bracelet. The photo was old, grainy, taken with a film camera, but the focus was sharp enough. I zoomed in on the bracelet. It didn't say Baby Girl Hughes. It didn't say Baby Girl Mercer. The name typed on the plastic strip was Baby Girl Miller. I stared at the screen. Miller. Proof. Proof that I wasn't just switched. I was one of at least 3, or maybe the names were just shuffled like a deck of cards. Proof that something tangible existed in 1989 that contradicted every record the hospital had. And someone, Mr. Holloway, or someone like him, had taken great care to make sure this bracelet disappeared before anyone could ask why a Mercer baby was wearing a Miller band, and why a Hughes baby was nowhere to be found. I lay back on the stiff hotel pillows. I wasn't an affair child. I was a ghost in the machine, and I was going to burn the machine down. The drive to Mason City took 45 minutes, time I spent rehearsing what I would say to a lawyer. I had never hired an attorney before. I dealt with contracts at work, but those were sterile agreements about supply chains and vendor liability. This was different. This was about the ownership of my own history. Nora Klein's office was located in a converted brick warehouse in the Arts District. The waiting room was filled with pamphlets about patient advocacy and medical malpractice statutes. It was not the plush, mahogany-paneled office of a corporate firm. It looked like a war room. Nora herself was a woman in her 50s with sharp, inquisitive eyes and a bob of steel-gray hair. She did not waste time with pleasantries. She ushered me into her office, listened to my story without interrupting, and took copious notes on a yellow legal pad. When I finished explaining the DNA results, the empty envelope from my grandmother, and the bracelet photo Elaine had shown me, Nora sat back. She tapped her pen against the desk. "It is a compelling narrative, Alice," she said. Her voice was dry, measured, but legally, it is a mess. I felt my shoulders slump. "I know it is circumstantial. It is worse than circumstantial," Nora said. "It is old. We are talking about records from 1989. Hospitals are required to keep medical records for a certain number of years, usually 10 to 20 depending on the state and the type of record. After that, they are often purged or moved to deep storage where they have a habit of getting lost." She leaned forward, her expression serious. But, she continued, "Birth registers and admission logs are different. They are permanent records. The problem is not whether they exist. The problem is getting Briar Glen Regional to admit they exist. If there was a systemic error, or intentional fraud, they will hide behind privacy laws. HIPAA is designed to protect patients, but institutions often use it as a shield to protect themselves. So what do we do?" I asked. "We file a formal request for your specific medical records," Nora said. "Not just the birth certificate. We want the nursing notes, the labor logs, the nursery admission ledger, and the discharge summaries. We will likely get a heavily redacted file, or a claim that the records are missing. Once they deny us, or stall, we file a lawsuit to compel discovery." She paused, looking me in the eye. "I need you to understand something. Alice, if we go down this road, we are not just looking for a clerical error. We are accusing a major regional healthcare provider of switching babies and covering it up. They have deep pockets and an army of lawyers. They will try to bury you in paper. They will try to discredit you. Are you ready for that?" I thought about Gordon's face when he announced my illegitimacy to the room. I thought about Elaine grieving a child she was told was dead. I am ready. I said, "Good." Nora said, "Sign the retainer. I will draft the request today." Leaving Nora's office gave me a sense of direction, but it did not solve the ache in my chest. I needed to talk to my mother, not the woman who had sat silently while her husband humiliated her for 3 decades, but the woman who had raised me. I needed to know if she was a victim or a conspirator. I called the house. No answer. I drove there. Gordon's car was gone, likely back at the country club. Marianne's sedan was in the driveway. I let myself in. The house was quiet. I found Marianne in the sunroom, staring blankly at the garden. She looked smaller than she had 2 days ago. The tension of the last 30 years seemed to have evaporated, leaving only a frail shell. "Mom?" I said softly. She jumped. When she saw it was me, her shoulders relaxed, but she did not smile. "Alice?" she said. "I thought you were your father." I sat down on the wicker chair opposite her. "I did not come to fight. Mom, I just need to understand." Marianne looked away. "There is nothing to understand. You heard him. I know what he says." I said, "But I know the science, Mom, and I know you. You did not have an affair." She closed her eyes. Tears squeezed out from beneath her lashes. "I never looked at another man." She whispered, "I loved him. God help me. I loved him so much." "Then tell me what happened at the hospital." I said, "Please." She took a shuddering breath. "It was chaos. Alice. That night it was a nightmare. There was a storm. The power flickered. The nurses were running everywhere. They took the baby away so fast. They said you had fluid in your lungs. They said you needed to be in the special care nursery." She opened her eyes, and they were filled with a haunting clarity. "I did not see you for 12 hours. When they finally brought you to me, you looked different." "Different how?" "Your hair," she said. "When you came out, I thought I saw dark hair. But the baby they brought me, you had this fuzz of blonde, and you felt different in my arms. A mother knows the weight of her own child. You felt lighter." I leaned in. "Did you say anything?" "Of course I did," she cried. "I told the nurse. I told Gordon. The nurse checked your bracelet. It said Hughes. She told me I was exhausted. She told me it was the lighting. She picked at a loose thread on the cushion. But then, 2 days later, just before discharge, we were called into an office. There were 3 men in suits, administrators, and a lawyer." "Mr. Holloway?" I asked. Marianne looked at me sharply. "How do you know that name?" "Never mind." I said, "What did they say?" "They were so polite," she said. "They told us there had been some confusion with the paperwork. They said there was a rumor of a mix-up, but they had investigated it thoroughly and determined that our baby was our baby. They said they wanted to offer us a discount on the bill. For the stress," she let out a bitter laugh, "a discount, as if you were a dented appliance." Gordon took it. He signed the papers. He wanted to go home. He hated hospitals. "And after that?" I asked. "After that he changed," she said. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "Before you were born, Gordon was arrogant. Yes, but he was happy. He was proud. But after we brought you home, he started staring at you. He would stand over your crib for hours, just watching. Then the comments started. The jokes about the milkman. The questions about who I had lunch with." She looked at me, her eyes pleading. "He became obsessed. Alice, it was like he was trying to solve a puzzle he was afraid of. He decided you were not his. It was easier for him to believe I was a whore than to believe he had been tricked by a hospital. If I was the villain, he could control me. If the hospital was the villain, he was powerless." I sat back, absorbing this. Gordon's cruelty wasn't just misogyny. It was a defense mechanism. He had constructed a narrative where he was the victim of a personal betrayal rather than a victim of institutional incompetence. He preferred to hate his wife rather than fight the system. "Thank you." "Mom," I said. She reached out and grabbed my hand. Her grip was surprisingly strong. Be careful, Alice, she said. Gordon is scared, and when he is scared, he is dangerous. I left the house feeling a mix of pity and resolve. I had another lead to follow. In the archives of my memory, I remembered a man named Caleb Rourke. He was Gordon's best friend from high school. They played golf together every Sunday, but I also remembered something Tessa had mentioned once, that Caleb used to work security at the hospital in the 80s. I found Caleb's address in the phone book. He lived in a ranch house on the outskirts of town. I drove there, parking on the street. Caleb was in his driveway, washing his truck. He was a big man, heavy-set now, with a red face and white stubble. He stopped scrubbing when he saw me walk up the driveway. "Alice Hughes," he said. "I haven't seen you since you were knee-high." "Hello, Mr. Rourke," I said. He wrung out his sponge. "I heard about the dinner. Your dad has a big mouth." "He does," I agreed. "I actually wanted to ask you about something else. Not the dinner. The hospital." Caleb went still. The water from the hose ran down the driveway, pooling around his boots. "What about the hospital?" he asked. "You worked security there in 1989, right?" I asked. "When I was born." Caleb dropped the sponge into the bucket. He walked over to the spigot and turned off the water. The silence was sudden and loud. "I worked there," he said, keeping his back to me. "A long time ago. I know there were issues that night." I said, "My mother told me about the chaos, the administrators. I know about the rumors of switched babies." Caleb turned around slowly. His face was hard. "Go home, Alice. Mr. Rourke, I just want the truth. There is no truth to be found there," he said. "Just old rot." He walked toward me, wiping his hands on a rag. "Your daddy made his peace with it," he said. "You should too." "My father made his peace by calling me a bastard for 30 years, I said, my voice rising. "That is not peace. That is a lie." Caleb stopped a few feet from me. He lowered his voice. "You think you are the only one?" he asked. "You think you are the only family that night that had questions? Then help me." I said, "Tell me what you saw." He shook his head. "I signed papers, Alice. Same as everyone else, and I have a pension to protect." He pointed a thick finger at me. "Some doors do not close the same once you open them. You are pulling on a thread that is tied to some very heavy rocks. You let it be." He turned and walked into his garage, hitting the button to lower the door. I stood there as the metal barrier rattled down, shutting me out. I was shaking again, not from fear, but from frustration. Everyone knew. They all knew something happened, and they had all agreed to a collective amnesia. I needed to see the other side of the equation. I needed to see the Mercers. Elaine texted me that afternoon. "My son is here. He wants to meet you." I drove back to Silver Hollow. My stomach was in knots. Meeting Elaine was one thing. She was a mother who had lost a child. Meeting Grant was different. He was the brother I never knew, the person who had lived the life that might have been mine. Elaine met me at the door, looking anxious. "Grant is in the kitchen," she whispered. "Be patient with him. This is a shock." I walked into the kitchen. Grant was leaning against the counter, a beer in his hand. He was tall, with dark hair and eyes that looked shockingly like the man I knew as my father, Gordon Hughes. The resemblance was visceral. He had Gordon's brow, Gordon's jaw. He looked at me, and I saw a flash of recognition, followed immediately by hostility. "So you are the miracle," he said. His voice was flat. "I am Alice." I said. Grant laughed. A short, sharp sound. "Mom says you are Sarah, the ghost she has been talking to for 30 years. I do not know who I am yet," I said, "but the DNA says we are siblings." Grant took a swig of his beer. "Great," he said. "Just great. You know what it was like growing up in this house? Every birthday, she would cry. Every Christmas, there was a stocking for the baby who died. I was the living kid, but I was never enough. I was competing with a ghost." He slammed the bottle down on the counter. "And now you show up, and you are real, which means she was right, and I have to watch her fawn over the daughter she finally got back. It wasn't my choice." "Grant," I said gently, "I didn't ask for this. My father spent my whole life telling me I didn't belong. I am just as lost as you are. Grant looked at me, his expression softening just a fraction. But the anger remained. You are not lost, he said. You are the answer to her prayers. I am just the guy who was here while she was waiting. He pushed past me, heading for the back door. Where are you going? Elaine called from the hallway. Out, Grant said. I cannot do this right now. The screen door slammed. Elaine looked at me, her face crumbling. He does not mean it. She said, he is just hurting. I know. I said, it is a theft. My existence steals his reality. I stayed for tea, but the air was thick with Grant's absence. Before I left, I asked Elaine about the hospital bills. Did you ever see anything strange on the financial side? I asked. She shook her head. No. We were on Medicaid back then. We didn't pay much. But what? There was a donation. She said, a few years later, the hospital built a new pediatric wing. They sent out a newsletter. I remember seeing a list of donors. There were the usual big names. And then there was a name I didn't expect to see. Whose? The Wexler Foundation. She said, they own the chemical plant down the river. They never gave money to the hospital before. But that year, they gave $1 million. I drove back to the hotel, my mind latching onto the name, Wexler. I opened my laptop and pulled up my DNA results again. I went back to the list of matches, the ones that weren't Gordon's and weren't Marianne's. The unknown cluster. I started clicking on the profiles of the distant cousins, third cousins, fourth cousins. I looked at their surnames. I looked at their family trees if they were public. I found a pattern. One of the fourth cousins had the last name Wexler. Another had a grandmother named Wexler. I searched for the Wexler Foundation. It was a massive philanthropic organization based in Charlotte, with deep ties to Briar Glen. They funded the library, the park, and the hospital. Why did I have DNA matches to the family that funded the hospital? If I was a Mercer, I shouldn't be related to the Wexlers, unless Elaine wasn't the only mother who had a problem that night. The thought was too big, too complex to process at midnight. I closed the laptop. 2 days later, Nora called me. We got a response. She said, her voice was tight, and they sent a packet. It is thin, suspiciously thin. I went to her office immediately. Nora had the documents spread out on her desk. Look at this, she said, pointing to a photocopied page. This is the nursery admission log for November 12th. Look at the times. I looked. The entries were handwritten. Baby boy Smith, 2 o'clock. Baby girl Jones, 2:15. There was a gap, a physical gap on the page where a line had been whited out. And look here, Nora said, pointing to a discharge summary. This is for baby girl Hughes. Look at the note under the ID band verification. I leaned in. In cramped, hurried handwriting, someone had written, ID band loose, replaced with corrected band per admin instruction. Corrected band. I whispered, that is the smoking gun. Alice, Nora said, you do not correct an ID band. You replace it if it falls off. But you log the original number. This implies they changed the identity. Not just the plastic, but look what is missing. Nora continued. No doctor's signature on the discharge, no nursing notes from the night shift, just the day shift. 12 hours of your life are missing from the record. My phone rang. It was Gordon. I stared at the screen. Answer it, Nora said. Put it on speaker. I swiped the green button. Hello? Alice, Gordon said. His voice was low, devoid of the bluster he had shown at the house. Where are you? I am busy. I said, I need to see you. He said, I am at the hotel. I saw your car. Come down to the lobby. Now. I looked at Nora. She nodded. Go. Record it if you can. I met him in the hotel bar. It was empty in the mid-afternoon. Gordon was sitting in a booth, staring into a glass of whiskey. He looked older than he had a few days ago. The victory lap was over. He saw me and gestured to the seat opposite him. I heard you went to see Caleb. He said, I did. Caleb called me. Gordon said, he said you are asking dangerous questions. I am asking for the truth. Dad, Or whatever I am supposed to call you. Gordon winced. He took a sip of whiskey. You think I am a monster, he said. I think you are a bully. I said. He sighed. A heavy rattling sound. I knew. Alice, the world stopped. What? I knew you were not mine, he said. Not because of an affair. Marianne is... She is a good woman. She is too religious to cheat. I knew that. Then why? I asked, my voice trembling. Why torture her? Why torture me? Because of the alternative. Gordon hissed. He leaned across the table. That night at the hospital. I saw the other baby. My breath caught in my throat. I was in the hallway, having a smoke. He said, I wasn't supposed to be there. I saw a nurse pushing a bassinet out of the east wing. She looked terrified. I looked in. That baby. It had my nose. It had my father's chin. He looked down at his hands. I tried to follow her, but security stopped me. Caleb stopped me. He told me to go back to my wife. He told me not to ask questions if I wanted to take a baby home at all. I stared at him in horror. You saw your biological child being taken away, and you did nothing? I was scared, Gordon said, his voice cracking. They told me there were complications. They implied that if I made a fuss, they would find a reason to call child services. They were powerful. Alice. The hospital board. The people running that place. You do not say no to them in this town. So you took me instead. I said, they gave you to us. He said, they said it was a paperwork error. They said you were healthy. They said the other baby, the one I saw died. He looked up at me, his eyes wet. I didn't believe them. But what could I do? Bring a dead baby home? Or bring you home and pretend? So I brought you home, but every time I looked at you, I saw the lie. I saw the fact that I was a coward. I saw the fact that I let them take my blood. So you made up the affair. I realized it was the only way to make it make sense, he cried. If Marianne had cheated, then I was a victim of a woman's sin. I could be angry at her. But if I admitted the truth, that I let a hospital steal my child and accepted a substitute, then I was the villain. I protected the family name. Alice, I kept us from being the town's scandal. You didn't protect the family, I said, standing up. You protected your ego. You let me grow up thinking I was a mistake, so you didn't have to admit you were a coward. I walked away from the booth. He called my name, but I didn't turn back. I drove back to Nora's office, my vision blurred by tears. The cruelty had a purpose. It was the camouflage for his own shame. When I walked into Nora's office, she was standing by the window, holding a large manila envelope. This just came, she said. It was slid under the door. I wiped my eyes. What is it? She opened it. Inside was a single photocopy of a logbook page. It was old, grainy, the edges dark from the copier. There was no return address, no note. Nora placed it on the desk. Look at the highlighted line. I looked. The handwriting was jagged. Urgent. Infant transfer. Authorized exception. 3:15 a.m. And next to it, a signature that was illegible, followed by a code. WX-priority. WX. I whispered, Wexler? Nora looked at me grimly. Authorized exception. That is not a medical term. Alice, that is an administrative one. Someone ordered this. Someone with the power to override the doctors. She picked up the phone. I am calling the judge. She said, we are not just asking for records anymore. We are asking for a criminal investigation. The photocopy of the logbook page lay on Nora Klein's desk like a map to a buried city. The handwriting was distinctive, looping, hurried, with a sharp slant to the right that suggested a person writing while walking, or perhaps running. Nora had spent the better part of the morning calling in favors from her old nursing school contacts, describing the specific way the capital letters were formed. It is Donna Vale, Nora said, circling the signature that looked like a jagged heartbeat. She was the head nurse of the neonatal unit in the late 80s, a tyrant, by all accounts, but efficient. She retired 10 years ago, moved out to Cedar Ridge. Cedar Ridge was a 40-minute drive from Mason City, a quiet, wooded community of manufactured homes and well-tended gardens where the working class of the county went to rest after decades of labor. I drove there alone. Nora had offered to come, but I felt this needed to be a conversation, not a deposition, not yet. Donna's house was beige with dark green shutters. There was a ceramic gnome by the mailbox and a wind chime made of silver spoons hanging on the porch. It looked aggressively normal, the kind of house that keeps secrets by being too boring to investigate. I knocked on the door. My heart was a steady, heavy drum in my chest. I expected a fight. I expected a slam of the door, a threat to call the police, or the icy denial I had received from the hospital administration. The door opened. Donna Vale was shorter than I imagined. She had hair the color of steel wool and a face etched with the kind of deep lines that come from years of frowning at charts. She wore a floral housecoat and slippers. She looked at me through the screen door, her eyes narrowing behind thick glasses. I did not have to introduce myself. She looked at my face, my chin, my eyes, and her shoulders sagged. It wasn't a gesture of defeat. It was a release. It was the physical manifestation of a breath held for 33 years finally being exhaled. "You have your father's eyes," she said. Her voice was scratchy, like dry leaves. "Which father?" I asked. She pushed the screen door open. "Come in," she said. "The kettle is on." The interior of the house was cluttered with ceramic figurines and framed photos of grandchildren. It smelled of peppermint and dust. We sat at a small formica table in the kitchen. She poured 2 mugs of tea without asking if I wanted one. "I knew you would come eventually," she said, sitting down heavily. "I used to look out the window every time a car slowed down, thinking it was you. Or maybe the other one." "The other one?" I asked. Donna wrapped her hands around the mug, seeking its warmth. "November 12th, 1989, she said. "We called it the incident window. It was a period of about 4 hours, from midnight to 4 in the morning." She looked up at me, and I saw the ghost of the terrifying head nurse she must have been. We were understaffed. The generator was acting up because of the storm. The lights kept flickering. We had 3 emergency C-sections in a row. It was a war zone. I leaned forward. "Tell me about the babies." Donna took a sip of tea. Her hand shook slightly. "We had 2 girls born within 15 minutes of each other, and a boy about an hour before that. The ID bands. The printer was jamming. We were writing them out by hand. I told the junior nurses to be careful. I told them to double-check." She closed her eyes. "But chaos is chaos. Sometime around 3 in the morning, I did a rounds check. I found a bassinet with a loose band. It had slipped off the ankle. It was lying in the blankets, and," I pressed, "and I didn't know which baby it was," she whispered. I looked at the chart attached to the plastic tub. It said Hughes, but the baby in the tub, she looked big. The Hughes baby was noted as being 5 pounds, 6 ounces. This baby looked closer to 7. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. "So what did you do?" "I went to the charge desk," she said. "I was going to call the doctor. I was going to order a blood type check. That is the protocol. You verify before you reband." She paused, staring into the dark liquid in her cup. "But Mr. Holloway was there, and a man from the board. I didn't know why they were there at 3 in the morning. They were in the back office with the door closed. When I knocked, they came out looking like I had caught them burying a body." She looked at me with a fierce intensity. I showed them the loose band. I told them I thought the babies had been swapped during the bath rotation. I told them we needed to wake the parents and do tests, and they said no. I guessed. They said absolutely not. Donna said, "They said the hospital was already facing a lawsuit from a botched delivery the week before. They said a baby switch scandal would bankrupt us. They said she swallowed hard. They said they would handle it." "How?" I asked. "How do you handle that?" Donna's face crumpled. "They made us sign papers. Confidentiality agreements that were thick as a Bible. They threatened our licenses. They threatened our pensions. They told us that they had verified the identities visually and that we were to simply reband the infant and discharge her." She reached across the table and gripped my wrist. Her fingers were cold. But that is not the worst part. Alice, what is the worst part? The next morning, when I came back on shift, the logs had been changed. One of the babies, the one I thought might be the Mercer girl, was gone. Her file was marked non-viable outcome. That means death. Stillbirth or neonatal demise. I thought of Elaine. I thought of her grief. But the baby didn't die. Did she? I asked. Donna shook her head slowly. I do not think so. I think she was moved. I think she was discharged under a corrected identity. But the other baby, the one who was supposed to be the Hughes baby, she was gone too. I felt the room spin. Wait, if the Mercer baby was discharged as Hughes, that is me. Donna nodded. That is what I always suspected. You looked like the Mercer family. I knew Elaine. I knew her face. Then where is the Hughes baby? I asked. Donna looked at the window. That is the question that haunts me. Was she the one who died? Or was she the one who was sent somewhere else? See, the paperwork didn't just swap two babies. It erased one and rewrote the other. One baby became a corpse on paper. The other became Alice Hughes. But physically, I think both babies lived. I think the death was the lie they used to balance the count. She leaned back, looking exhausted. I never knew which family got which child. I just knew that the count was wrong. And I knew that Mr. Holloway walked out of there with a briefcase that looked heavier than when he walked in. I left Cedar Ridge with my mind reeling. The implications were no longer just about a mistake. This was trafficking. This was a deliberate restructuring of reality by men in suits who treated human lives like inventory that needed to be balanced. If I was the Mercer baby, given to the Hughes family to replace the child they lost, or were told died, then who was the baby Elaine mourned? Was it the Hughes baby? Or was there a third child? And Marianne, the question of my mother, the woman who raised me, burned in my gut. Donna said the administration handled it. They told the parents it was a paperwork error. But Marianne had noticed I was different. She had noticed I was lighter. She had noticed the hair color. If Marianne had raised me knowing, on some level, that I wasn't the child she birthed, was she a victim of gaslighting? Or was she a co-conspirator? Had she accepted the lie because it was easier than the truth? Or had she been threatened? I drove back to Briar Glen, the familiar roads looking sinister in the fading light. Every building, every street corner seemed to hide a secret. When I pulled up to the house to check on the mail, a habit I hadn't broken despite moving to the hotel, I saw boxes in the living room window. I parked and let myself in. The house was in disarray. Suitcases were open on the floor. Gordon was wrapping crystal vases in newspaper. "What is going on?" I asked. Gordon looked up. He looked haggard, his eyes rimmed with red. "We are taking a trip," he said. "A long one, maybe down to Florida. Your mother needs sea air." He went back to wrapping a vase, his movements jerky and frantic. "This isn't about sea air." "Gordon," I said, "you are running." He stopped. He didn't look at me. "The town is talking. Alice, Caleb has been running his mouth. People are looking at us in the grocery store. I will not have your mother subjected to that. The gossip is poisoning us. It is not the gossip." I said, "It is the subpoena. You know it is coming." Gordon slammed the vase down into the box. "I am protecting this family," he shouted. "Something I have done for 40 years. You think you are some crusader? Alice, you are a wrecking ball. You are destroying everything just to prove a point." "I am trying to find out who I am," I yelled back. "You are Alice Hughes," he roared. "You are the girl I fed and clothed and sent to school. Is that not enough?" "No," I said. "It is not enough when it is built on a lie." Marianne walked into the room. She was holding a stack of folded towels. She looked between us, her face pale and drawn. "Please," she whispered, "please stop shouting." "Mom, you don't have to go," I said to her. "You can stay. We can figure this out." She looked at Gordon. He was staring at her, a silent, heavy warning in his eyes. "We need a vacation." "Alice," she said. Her voice was mechanical. Just a little break. She was leaving. She was choosing him. She was choosing the silence again. I watched them pack. It felt like a funeral. I realized then that Gordon's power wasn't just in his anger. It was in his ability to make everyone around him feel like they were the ones who were crazy. He was retreating not to save Marianne, but to sequester her, to make sure she didn't talk to me, to make sure she didn't remember the lighter baby in front of a judge. I left them to their packing. I couldn't stop them, not legally. As I drove back to the hotel, my phone rang. The number was blocked. Hello? Ms. Hughes? The voice was smooth, male, cultivated. It sounded like expensive cologne. Who is this? My name is Arthur Pendleton. I am calling on behalf of the Wexler Foundation. I nearly slammed on the brakes. I pulled over onto the shoulder of the highway, my heart hammering. How did you get my number? We have mutual interests. Ms. Hughes, we understand you are going through a difficult time regarding some historical confusion at Briar Glen Regional. Historical confusion. That was a nice way to say kidnapping. What do you want? I asked. We would like to offer you a solution. Mr. Pendleton said, the Foundation is aware that litigation can be costly and emotionally draining. We are prepared to facilitate a private mediation. Mediation? A settlement. Ms. Hughes, for the emotional distress you have suffered, we are authorized to offer a significant sum. 7 figures. In exchange for a non-disclosure agreement and the sealing of any personal records you may have obtained. I gripped the steering wheel. You are trying to buy me off. We are trying to help you move on, he said. And to protect the legacy of the hospital, which does so much good for this community, a public scandal would only hurt the patients of today. Why does the Wexler Foundation care? I asked, unless you were involved. There was a pause, a silence that felt heavy and calculated. The Foundation supports the hospital. Ms. Hughes, we protect our investments. Think about it. You could start a new life, a very comfortable life. I hung up. I sat there, staring at the pine trees lining the road. 7 figures, $1 million, maybe more, just to stop asking questions, just to let the dead baby stay dead and the lie stay true. It felt less like an offer of help and more like a purchase. They weren't buying my silence. They were buying my identity. I started the car and drove. I needed to think, but before I could get to the hotel, I saw a truck parked at the entrance, a battered Ford. Grant Mercer was leaning against the hood. I pulled up next to him. He looked angry. He looked like he hadn't slept. We need to talk, he said. We sat on a bench outside the hotel lobby. He didn't look at me. He watched the traffic passing by. Mom is a mess, he said. I am sorry. I said, are you? He turned to me, his eyes blazing. She hasn't eaten in 2 days. She just sits there holding that picture of the bracelet. You are tearing her open. Alice, I am trying to get her justice. Grant, she deserves to know that her baby didn't die. And then what? He asked. What happens when you prove it? Do you think the hospital is just going to hand over a baby they stole 30 years ago? Do you think you can just swap families now? No. I said, exactly. You are chasing a ghost. And in the meantime, you are destroying the peace she finally found. She had accepted it. Alice, it was a scar, but it was healed. Now it is an open wound again. He leaned forward, his voice dropping. You want the truth for you. You do not care who gets hurt. You are just like your father. You are selfish. The words stung like a slap. That is not fair. I said, isn't it? Grant asked. You are blowing up my life. You are blowing up your mother's life. You are blowing up my mother's life. For what? To change the name on a piece of paper? He stood up. Leave her alone. Alice, if you care about her at all, just take your DNA test and go back to your city. Let us be. He walked away. I watched him go, feeling a pit of shame in my stomach. Was he right? Was I doing this for justice? Or was I doing it to punish Gordon? Was I willing to sacrifice Elaine's sanity to validate my own existence? I went up to my hotel room. But I couldn't settle. The image of the boxes in my parents' living room kept flashing in my mind. Gordon was running. He was running because he was guilty. But guilty of what, exactly? Donna had said, Mr. Holloway had a briefcase. I grabbed my keys. I had to go back to the house. I knew Gordon and Marianne were leaving in the morning. This was my last chance. I parked down the street and walked up. The lights were off downstairs. They must have gone to bed early. Exhausted from the packing. I still had my key. I let myself in silently. The house smelled of cardboard and anxiety. I crept into the den. This was Gordon's sanctuary. If there were answers, they would be here. I didn't turn on the light. I used the flashlight on my phone. The desk was already cleared off, the surface bare, but the drawers were not empty yet. I rifled through them. Old tax returns, manuals for appliances long broken, golf scorecards. I pulled out the bottom drawer. It stuck. I jiggled it. Something was wedged behind it. I reached my hand into the gap behind the drawer. I felt a book, a small, bound ledger. I pulled it out. It was a gray account book, the kind you buy at an office supply store. I opened it. It was in Gordon's handwriting. It wasn't a business ledger. It was a personal log of expenses. I flipped to 1989, November 15th. Hospital bill, paid in full. December 1st, donation to building fund, $5,000. $5,000. In 1989, that was a lot of money, especially for a man who claimed to be struggling with a new baby. I flipped the pages. January 1990. Donation to Friends of the Hospital, $2,000. June 1990. Donation to Pediatric Wing, $3,000. The entries continued for 3 years. Regular, substantial payments, all marked as donations, all to the hospital or its auxiliary funds. I did the math in my head. He had paid nearly $50,000 to the hospital over 3 years. Gordon Hughes was a cheap man. He complained about the price of gas. He complained about the cost of college. He did not donate $50,000 out of the goodness of his heart. This wasn't charity. This was rent. He was paying for the lie. He was paying them to keep the file closed. He was paying them to keep me. I took a picture of the pages. My hand was steady now. The doubt Grant had planted was gone. This wasn't just a mistake that people were trying to forget. This was a transaction. I had been bought. I slipped out of the house. I didn't confront them. I didn't scream. I had what I needed. I went straight to Nora's house. It was late, but she answered the door in her robe. I found the money. I said, we sat in her kitchen. She looked at the photos of the ledger. This changes things, she said quietly. This proves knowledge. It proves intent. It pierces the statute of limitations on fraud if we can prove concealment. She looked up at me. But Alice, I need to warn you. What? If we use this? If we go after the foundation and the hospital with this, it is going to get ugly. They will countersue. They will dig up every mistake you have ever made. They will drag your mother through the mud. They will say she was unstable. They will say she knew. She paused, and the town will turn on you. Briar Glen protects its own. The hospital is the biggest employer in the county. The Wexlers are gods here. You will be the pariah. You will be the woman who tried to bankrupt the hospital. I thought about Grant. I thought about Elaine. I thought about Marianne, packing her towels with shaking hands. I looked at the ledger. I looked at the proof that my father had paid for my existence like he was paying off a car loan. I am not afraid of them. I said, it is not about fear. Nora said, it is about cost. Are you willing to burn it all down? I sat there for a long time. The silence of the kitchen was heavy. I realized then that there were 2 ways to do this. I could be the storm that destroyed everything, or I could be the surgeon who cut out the rot. I won't be bought, I said, and I won't be shamed into silence. I stood up, but I won't destroy them for sport. Nora, I don't want to ruin Elaine. I don't want to kill Marianne. I want the truth. I want the record corrected. I want an admission. I looked at her. We do this, but we do it precisely. We target the system, not the victims. We go after the people who signed the papers, not the people who were tricked into signing them. Nora nodded slowly. She smiled. A sharp, dangerous smile. Then we better get to work. I walked out into the night air. It was cool and crisp. I felt a strange sense of calm. I wasn't just a victim of a lie anymore. I was the one holding the pen, and I was going to rewrite the story, word by word, until it was true. The legal machinery moved with the speed of a glacier. But glaciers, given enough time, can crush mountains. Nora Klein had filed the emergency motion for discovery on Monday morning. By Wednesday, the hospital's legal team was claiming that the specific archives from 1989 had been damaged in a basement flood in the early 2000s. It was a convenient excuse, the kind that usually worked because no one had the energy to fight it. But Nora did not accept it. She subpoenaed the maintenance logs for the building. Proving there had never been a flood in the record storage wing, she threatened to depose the current CEO. She made noise, loud and specific noise, until the stone wall began to crack. On Thursday afternoon, a courier arrived at Nora's office with a single cardboard box. It smelled of mildew and stale air. "They found it," Nora said, her voice dripping with sarcasm as she called me. Amazing how things turn up when a judge threatens a contempt charge. I went to her office immediately. The box contained canisters of microfilm, the old-fashioned kind that required a specialized reader to view. Nora had rented one, a bulky gray machine that hummed loudly when she turned it on. We sat in the darkened room, the only light coming from the glowing screen. I felt like a detective in a noir film, scrolling through the ghostly negatives of a time before I was born. "We are looking for the nursery log," Nora said, threading the film. November 12th, the images whirred past, patient lists, medication charts, duty rosters. "Stop," I said. Nora froze the frame. There it was. Nursery A, Shift 3. We leaned in. The handwriting was cramped. I recognized the jagged script of Donna Vale. The head nurse. There were 3 entries for that time block. 1:45 a.m., male infant, ID 89-1044. 2:10 a.m., female infant, ID 89-1045. 2:25 a.m., female infant, ID 89-1046. Nora adjusted the focus. "Look at the middle entry," she said. I squinted at the screen. The line for ID 89-1045 was strange. The name written next to it was Hughes, but the ink looked thicker, darker than the surrounding text, and beneath the loops of the H and the G, there was a shadow of another letter, a straight line, a capital M. "It is overwritten," I whispered. "It is not a correction," Nora said, her voice hard. "In medical records, a correction requires a single strike-through, the new data, and the initials of the person making the change. This is forgery. Someone wrote over the original name to hide it." She scrolled down. "And look at the next entry, ID 89-1046, Mercer." But next to the Mercer entry, there was a notation in the margin, status, NV, non-viable. I said, remembering Donna's words, "But look at the ID numbers." Nora said, "If the Mercer baby was born at 2:25, she should have been 1046. But look at the wristband column. The number listed for the Mercer baby was 89-1045. They switched the numbers." I said, "They swapped the identities in the log, but they messed up the chronological order. They tried to fix it by writing over the names, but they forgot to change the timestamps." "This is it," Nora said, sitting back. "This proves it was not an accident. You do not accidentally write a name over another name and then mismatch the ID numbers. This was a frantic attempt to make the paperwork match a physical reality that had already been altered." I stared at the glowing screen. I was looking at the moment my life was stolen. I was looking at the ink that had erased me. "We need Donna Vale to testify to this," I said. "We need her to explain what we are looking at." Nora nodded. "I will call her." Donna was terrified. When we spoke to her, she insisted on meeting in a neutral location, a diner 3 towns over. She wore big sunglasses and kept checking the door. "I cannot go to court," she said. her hands shaking around her coffee cup. "You do not understand. The people who sit on that board. They own this county. They can pull my pension. They can hurt my family." "Donna," I said gently, "I have the log. I have the proof that the names were altered. If you do not speak, they will blame you. They will say it was your handwriting. They will say you were the incompetent nurse who caused a tragedy." She looked at me, her eyes wide behind the dark lenses. "They would do that," she whispered. "They would hang me out to dry to save themselves. The only way to protect yourself is to tell the truth," Nora added. "We can depose you in private. We can seal your identity in the initial filing, but we need a sworn statement." Donna took a deep breath. She looked at the table, then at me. "I remember that night," she said softly. "I remember the man in the suit telling me that if I ever spoke of it, I would never work in nursing again. I was young. I needed the job. But I have carried that night for 33 years. She picked up her purse. "Write it up," she said to Nora. "I will sign it, with the affidavit and the microfilm. We had a weapon. But I wasn't done with the past. I still had unfinished business in the house on Elm Street. I drove to my parents' house. The for sale sign wasn't up yet, but the house had the hollow, staged look of a property about to be abandoned. The boxes were stacked by the door. Gordon was in the garage, loading his golf clubs into the trunk of the car. He looked up when I pulled in. He didn't smile. He didn't frown. He just looked tired. "You are still here," he said. I walked up the driveway. I was holding a folder. Inside were the photos of the ledger I had found in his desk. "I know about the money." "Gordon," I said. He stopped moving. He didn't turn around. "I know you paid them." I continued. $50,000. That was the price, wasn't it? To keep the secret? Gordon turned slowly. He leaned against the bumper of the car. He looked smaller than I had ever seen him. The bluster, the arrogance, it was all gone. "It was not a bribe," he said. His voice was raspy. "It was a donation. It was hush money." I said, "You paid them to bury the mistake so you could pretend I was yours. Or rather, so you could pretend you were the victim of an affair instead of a victim of the system." Gordon laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "You think it was just about the system? You think I cared about the hospital? Then what?" I asked. "Why did you do it?" He looked at me, and for the first time, I saw the raw, pathetic truth in his eyes. I was 40 years old. Alice, I was the man everyone looked up to. I was the man who had everything under control. If I had come home and told everyone that the hospital had lost my baby, that they had tricked me, that I had walked out with the wrong child, I would have been the laughingstock of Briar Glen. I would have been the man who couldn't even protect his own blood. He shook his head. "But if you were an affair child, if Marianne had stepped out, then I was the tragic hero. I was the saint who stayed. I was the strong man who forgave the weak woman. It gave me the power. Alice, it made me the head of the house again." I stared at him. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. He had branded me a bastard and his wife a whore not because he believed it, but because it was a more convenient narrative for his ego than admitting he had been swindled. "You sacrificed us," I said quietly. "You sacrificed Mom's reputation and my identity just so you could feel like a big man. I did what I had to do to keep the family together," he shouted, pushing off the car. "If I had fought the hospital, they would have destroyed us. They told me the other baby was dead. What was I supposed to do? Give you back? And be left with nothing?" He was trembling. "I loved you, in my own way," he said. "I paid for your school. I gave you a home. You gave me a roof." I said, "You never gave me a home. You gave me a cage made of your own insecurity." I threw the folder onto the passenger seat of his car. "We are going to court, Gordon, and everyone is going to know. Not that Marianne cheated, but that you paid to lie." I walked away from him. I found Marianne in the kitchen. She was sitting at the table, staring at a ceramic salt shaker. She didn't look up when I entered. "He told you, didn't he?" she asked. She knew. She had always known. "He told me he paid them." I said. Marianne nodded slowly. "I saw the checks." She whispered, "Years ago. I never asked what they were for. I didn't have to." "Mom," I said, sitting down across from her, "I need to know the truth. Not his truth. Yours." She looked up. Her eyes were red-rimmed. "That night, when they brought you to me, I told you felt different. I told you I suspected." "Yes," I said, "but there is something I didn't tell you," she said. She took a breath, steeling herself, before we left the hospital. After the meeting with the administrators, a nurse came to see me. Not Donna, another one. She came into my room when Gordon was in the hallway. She leaned over my bed and she whispered to me. What did she say? She said, "The baby you have is healthy. The baby you lost is gone. Do not ask questions you do not want the answers to. Just take the blessing and go." Marianne's voice broke. "I knew then. I knew you weren't the baby I had birthed. I knew it in my bones." "Then why?" I asked, tears stinging my eyes. "Why did you keep me? Why didn't you scream?" She reached across the table and took my hands. Her grip was desperate, because I was holding you. "Alice, you were warm. You were breathing. You were looking up at me with these big, trusting eyes, and they told me the other baby, my biological baby, was dead." She squeezed my hands. If I had screamed, if I had demanded an investigation, they would have taken you away, and if the other baby was truly gone, I would have had nothing. I would have lost 2 children in one night. She looked at me with a fierce, terrifying love. So I made a choice. I chose the living. I chose you. I decided that being a mother was more important than DNA. I decided to love you so hard that it wouldn't matter where you came from. "But you let him treat me like dirt," I said. "You let him call me a bastard, because that was the deal," she cried. "That was the price of the silence. If I let him play his game, if I let him have his story, he let me keep you. He let me be your mother." I pulled my hands away. I felt like I was fracturing into 1,000 pieces. Marianne loved me. She had saved me. But she had also bought me with her silence. She had allowed me to live in a house where I was despised, just so she could have a child to hold. It was love, but it was a selfish, desperate, terrified love. I do not know if I can forgive that. "Mom," I said, "I do not expect you to," she whispered. "I just want you to know that you were never a mistake to me. You were the only thing I ever fought for." I stood up. The air in the kitchen felt too thick to breathe. "I am going to fix this," I said, "but I am not doing it for you. And I am not doing it for Gordon. I am doing it for the girl who died, or the girl who lived and was forgotten." I left the house. I drove to Silver Hollow. I needed to see Elaine. She was in her garden, weeding the flower beds with a savage intensity. When she saw me, she stood up, wiping her hands on her apron. "They called me," she said. "Who?" "A lawyer. From the foundation." "What did they say?" I asked, dread coiling in my stomach. "They offered me money." Elaine said, "A lot of money. They said it was a compassionate payment for the confusion of the past. They said if I signed a paper, they would set up a trust for Grant." "Did you take it?" I asked. Elaine looked at me. Her eyes were clear and hard. "I told them to go to hell." I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. "I do not want their money." "Alice," she said, "I do not want a scholarship for Grant. I do not want a new roof." She pointed a dirt-stained finger at me. "I spent 33 years mourning a child I was told was dead. I visited a grave that was empty. I cried over a box of ashes that was probably just dust from the furnace. They stole my grief. They made me mourn a lie." She stepped closer. "I want a piece of paper. Alice, I want an official piece of paper from that hospital that says baby girl Mercer did not die. I want a death certificate retracted. I want a birth certificate issued. I want the world to know that I was a mother who was robbed, not a mother who was unlucky." She grabbed my shoulders. "You get that for me. You get the truth? I promise," I said. The next morning, the story broke. Not in the way we planned. A reporter from the Briar Glen Gazette, a young man named Ben Miller who had been hanging around the courthouse, caught wind of the motion for discovery. He didn't have the full story, but he had enough. Hospital accused of record tampering in 1989. The headline was on the front page. Nora called me at 6 a.m. "We are exposed," she said. "The reporter is asking questions. The hospital is in panic mode. What do we do?" I asked. "We control the narrative," Nora said. "Before they spin it." I sat down at the desk in my hotel room. I opened my laptop. I didn't want to give an interview. I didn't want to be a soundbite. I wrote a statement. "My name is Alice Hughes. For 33 years, I lived under the weight of a family secret. I was told I was the result of a moral failing. I was treated as an outsider in my own home. Recently, science proved that my history was a lie, but the lie was not my mother's affair. The lie was a systemic failure of the institution that was sworn to protect us. I am not looking for money. I am not looking to destroy Briar Glen Regional. I am looking for the truth about what happened on the night of November 12th, 1989. I am looking for the identity of the child who was erased so that I could be written in. We deserve to know who we are." I sent it to Nora. She released it, by noon. The phone in my hotel room wouldn't stop ringing. I unplugged it. At 2 o'clock, Arthur Pendleton, the lawyer for the Wexler Foundation, called Nora. He wanted a meeting, immediate. We met in a conference room at the courthouse. Pendleton was smooth, polished, and smelling of fear. He was accompanied by 2 other suits from the hospital's legal team. "Ms. Hughes," Pendleton said, sliding a thick document across the mahogany table. "We are prepared to end this today." I looked at the document. It was a settlement agreement. "The terms are generous," Pendleton said. "The hospital will admit to clerical errors and administrative confusion regarding your birth. We will issue a corrected birth certificate. We will pay a settlement of $2 million to you and $1 million to Mrs. Mercer." I looked at the fine print. Confidentiality clause. The parties agree to keep the terms of this settlement and all underlying facts sealed. No admission of liability is made regarding intentional acts. Non-disparagement. The parties agree to make no public statements regarding Briar Glen Regional Medical Center or its donors. It was a golden handcuffs deal. They would fix my paperwork, pay me a fortune, and in exchange, the world would never know about the overwritten logbook. They would never know about the authorized exception. They would never know about Gordon's donations. "It is a good offer," Nora said neutrally. "It secures your future. It secures Elaine's future." I looked at Pendleton. "You want to seal the facts." I said, "We want privacy," he corrected, "for everyone involved. You want to hide the fact that you decided which baby lived and which baby died based on who had the most to lose." I said, "Ms. Hughes, that is speculation," Pendleton said sharply. I stood up. I pushed the papers back across the table. "No," Pendleton blinked. "Excuse me?" I said no. "I do not want your money, and I do not want your silence." I leaned over the table. "If I sign this, the next time you make a mistake, you will just buy your way out of it again. You will bury the next Alice Hughes. I am not selling my story. Mr. Pendleton, I am reclaiming it. We will see you in court," I said. I walked out. Nora followed me, a small, proud smile on her face. The hearing was set for the next day. It was a preliminary hearing on the motion to unseal the full archives, but it felt like the main event. The courtroom was packed. The reporter, Ben Miller, was in the front row. I saw Gordon and Marianne sitting in the back. They looked like strangers. Gordon was staring at the floor. Marianne was looking at me, her face a mask of tragedy and hope. I saw Elaine and Grant on the other side. Elaine nodded to me. Grant looked conflicted, but he was there. I walked to the plaintiff's table. I wasn't carrying a briefcase. I wasn't carrying a stack of legal precedents. I was holding 2 things. In my left hand, I held the printout of my DNA results, the science that had started the fire. In my right hand, I held the photograph Elaine had given me, the grainy black and white picture of a newborn wrist wearing a bracelet that said Baby Girl Miller. I set them down on the table. The judge entered. "All rise." I stood up. I felt a calm settle over me. The anger was gone. The confusion was gone. I wasn't the affair child. I wasn't the ghost sibling. I was the evidence, and for the first time in 33 years, I was going to speak the truth, and the world was going to have to listen. The heavy oak doors of the county courthouse swung open, releasing a stale breath of air-conditioned coolness into the humid afternoon. Inside, the gallery was packed. Word had spread. This was no longer just a dispute about a birth certificate. It was a reckoning for Briar Glen Regional Medical Center. The town had come to see if the institution that birthed them, healed them, and buried them was built on a foundation of lies. I sat at the plaintiff's table next to Nora Klein. My hands were folded on the wood, steady and cold. Behind me, I could feel the eyes of the community. I could feel Marianne's terrified gaze. I could feel Gordon's simmering resentment. The hospital's legal team, led by Arthur Pendleton, looked less confident than they had in the conference room. They had tried to settle. They had tried to buy silence. Now, they were forced to rely on their surprise witness, Mr. Sterling, a man in his late 70s with a shock of white hair and a suit that looked expensive but dated. Took the stand. He was the former vice president of risk management. He walked with a cane, playing up his frailty for the judge. Under Pendleton's gentle questioning, Sterling painted a picture of a chaotic night in 1989. He spoke of power outages, exhausted nurses, and a regrettable but understandable clerical confusion. It was a perfect storm, Sterling said, his voice trembling just enough to garner sympathy. We had multiple infants born in a short window. The wristbands were handwritten because the printer was down. In the confusion, names were transcribed onto the wrong logs. It was not malice, Your Honor. It was human error. A tragedy, yes, but not a crime. He looked at me with sad, paternal eyes. We tried to protect the families from unnecessary distress. He added, we did not want to alarm them with administrative mix-ups that had no medical bearing. It was a compelling performance. He made the hospital sound like a benevolent grandfather trying to shield his children from the messy details of life. Then Nora Klein stood up. She walked to the podium, holding the single photocopy of the logbook page we had received from the anonymous source. Mr. Sterling, she began, her voice crisp. You claim this was a chaotic night, a simple mix-up of names due to exhaustion. Yes, that is correct, Sterling said. Nora placed the paper on the projector. The image of the logbook appeared on the wall, magnified for everyone to see. Can you explain, then, Nora asked, why the entry for the Mercer infant has a timestamp of 2:25 in the morning, but the entry for the Hughes infant, which appears above it in the chronological log, is stamped 3:15? Sterling blinked. I suppose the nurse wrote them out of order. Nora pointed to the screen. And this code here, she said, next to the altered entry, WX priority. What does that mean? Mr. Sterling? Sterling shifted in his seat. I do not recall that code. It was a long time ago. Let me refresh your memory, Nora said. We pulled the donor records from the Wexler Foundation. In 1989, WX was the internal designation for the Wexler account. Why would a clerical error regarding a standard birth be flagged with a high-level donor priority code? Sterling remained silent. He reached for his water glass. His hand was shaking, and it wasn't an act this time. And this phrase, Nora continued, her voice rising, authorized exception. You do not authorize an error. Mr. Sterling, you authorize a procedure. You authorize a transfer. You authorize a cover-up. Objection, Pendleton shouted. Argumentative. Sustained, the judge said. But he was leaning forward, staring at Sterling. Nora lowered her voice. Mr. Sterling, did you order the records altered to conceal the fact that one infant had died and another was swapped to replace her? I did what was best for the hospital, Sterling snapped, losing his composure. We could not have a scandal. Not with the expansion funding on the line. The courtroom erupted. A gasp rippled through the gallery like a shockwave. He hadn't admitted to the swap directly, but he had admitted the motive, the funding, the money. Nora sat down. She didn't need to say anything else. Then, the judge entered Donna Vale's affidavit into the record. The clerk read it aloud. The words of the retired nurse hung in the air, stripping away the last remnants of the clerical error defense. Donna described the coercion, the threats to her pension, the sight of Mr. Holloway with his briefcase, and the deliberate instruction to overwrite the names. The narrative in the room shifted. It wasn't a family drama anymore. It wasn't about Marianne Hughes's alleged infidelity. It was about a powerful institution that had decided two babies were interchangeable assets in a ledger. I turned to look at Gordon. He was sitting with his arms crossed, his face a mask of stone. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at the judge, realizing that his $50,000 hadn't bought silence forever. It had only rented it. When the court recessed for lunch, Gordon intercepted me in the hallway. He looked furious. But underneath the anger, there was a frantic, cornered panic. "Are you happy?" he hissed. "You have dragged our name through the mud. You have made me look like a fool." I looked at him. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel the need to shrink away. "I didn't make you look like a fool." "Gordon," I said calmly, "you did that when you decided to protect your pride instead of your daughter. I am done with you." He spat. "You are not my blood. You are not my problem anymore. I am washing my hands of this. You are on your own." He expected me to crumble. He expected the daughter who used to beg for his approval to cry, but I just nodded. "You are right," I said. "I am not your problem, and you are not my father. But you are wrong about one thing." "What is that?" he sneered. "You treated a child like a rumor." I said, "You treated me like a piece of gossip that you could suppress. But rumors fade, Gordon. Records do not. And now, the record will show exactly who you are." I walked past him. He stood there, alone in the hallway, a small man in a large world that had finally stopped believing his story. The judge returned a ruling 3 days later. It wasn't the neat, cinematic victory of a gavel slam and immediate justice. It was something more bureaucratic, but ultimately more powerful. The court ordered an independent forensic review of all archived materials from the maternity ward for the year 1989. The judge mandated that the hospital correct the birth records of Alice Hughes and the death records of baby girl Mercer, pending the outcome of the review. He unsealed the confidentiality agreements signed by the staff, effectively stripping the lie of its legal protection. It was the beginning of the end for the cover-up. 2 weeks later, I sat in a small office with the court-appointed reviewer, a forensic auditor named Dr. Aris. He had spent days going through the microfilm, the billing codes, and the recovered logbooks. "We have traced the sequence," he said, sliding a diagram across the desk. He pointed to a timeline. At 2:10 in the morning, a female infant was born to Marianne Hughes. She was assigned ID number 1045. She was healthy. He moved his finger. At 2:25, a female infant was born to Elaine Mercer. She was assigned ID number 1046. She was also healthy initially, but developed respiratory distress. My heart hammered. At 3 o'clock, Dr. Aris continued. The Hughes infant, ID 1045, suffered a sudden cardiac event. The logs are fragmentary here, but it appears she was rushed to the acute care unit. He looked at me. She did not survive. Alice, the biological child of Gordon and Marianne Hughes, died at 3:15 in the morning. I closed my eyes. The baby Gordon saw. The baby he thought was me. "But, Doctor," Aris said, his voice dropping, "the hospital did not declare the death. Instead, under administrative order, they took the Mercer infant, ID 1046, and physically switched the bands. They rewrote the log to assign the Mercer baby the Hughes identity. So I am the Mercer baby," I whispered. "The evidence strongly supports that conclusion." He said, "You were the healthy infant. You were given to the Hughes family to replace the child they lost, likely to avoid a lawsuit over the sudden death of the Hughes baby, or simply to keep the success rate of the unit high during a funding drive." "And the Hughes baby?" I asked. "What happened to her body?" "Doctor," Aris sighed, "that is where the trail ends. Her file was converted to non-viable outcome. under the Mercer name, but there is no burial record, no cremation log. It is likely she was disposed of as medical waste or buried in a pauper's grave under a Jane Doe designation to hide the evidence. I felt a wave of nausea. It was a vindication. Yes, I knew who I was, but there was no full closure. There was no grave for Marianne to visit. There was no body to return to the earth. The system had not just stolen a life, it had erased a death. I drove to Silver Hollow to tell Elaine. She was sitting on her porch, rocking slowly. When I showed her the report that confirmed I was the baby she heard cry, she didn't scream. She didn't wail. She just closed her eyes and let the tears fall, silent and steady. I knew. She whispered, "A mother knows the sound of her own life." She reached out and touched my face. Her fingers traced my jawline, my eyebrows. "You lived," she said. "You grew up." "I did." I said. She took a deep breath, and for the first time since I met her, the tension in her shoulders released. "I am not crazy," she said. "I didn't imagine her. I didn't imagine you." "No." I said, "You were right. You were always right." She grieved then. She grieved for the 33 years of birthdays she missed. She grieved for the first steps she never saw, but it was a clean grief. It was a grief based on truth, not on the foggy, gaslighting lie she had been fed. She was mourning a separation, not a death. The hardest conversation was with Marianne. I went back to the house one last time. Gordon was gone. He had packed his bags and left for Florida 2 days after the ruling, unable to face the whispers at the country club. Marianne was alone in the house that felt too big and too quiet. I sat with her in the kitchen. I told her what Dr. Aris had found. I told her that her biological daughter had died that night. Marianne wept. She wept for the baby she lost, and she wept for the years she had spent terrified of this exact moment. "I was so scared. Alice," she sobbed. "I was so scared that if I asked questions, I would lose you too. I couldn't bear to lose 2 babies. So I lied to myself. I told myself you were mine. And then when Gordon started his crusade, I just wanted to keep the peace." I looked at her. I looked at the woman who had buttered my toast and bandaged my knees, but who had also watched me wither under her husband's cruelty because she was too afraid to speak. "I know you loved me. Mom," I said. "I know you chose me. I did," she said, grasping my hands. "You are my daughter. Alice. DN. Doesn't change that." "No," I said gently, pulling my hands back. "It doesn't change the past, but it changes the future." I stood up. "I can forgive the fear. Mom, I can understand why a grieving mother would cling to the baby she was given, but I cannot forget the silence. I cannot forget that you let me believe I was broken just so you could feel whole." She looked at me, stricken. "Are you leaving me?" "I am not cutting you off." I said, "I will always be the daughter you raised. But I need space. I need to be Alice Mercer for a while. I need to know who I am when I'm not trying to be the perfect Hughes daughter." I walked to the door. "We can talk," I said, "but not about Gordon, and not about the past. We start over, or we do not start at all." Marianne nodded, tears streaming down her face. She understood. The lie that had bound us together was gone, and now we had to see if there was anything real underneath it. Grant met me at a diner halfway between Briar Glen and Silver Hollow. He looked tired, but the anger in his eyes had dulled to a weary acceptance. "So," he said, stirring his coffee, "you are actually my sister." "Technically, yes," I said. He looked at me. It was strange. We were strangers with the same blood. We had missed a lifetime of fights and inside jokes. We couldn't force a sibling bond now. We couldn't pretend we were a happy family. "I am not going to call you sis," he said. "That is fine." I said, "Alice works." He nodded. "Mom is better." He said, "She sleeps through the night now." "That is something. It is everything." I said. He hesitated. then reached into his pocket. He pulled out a keychain. It was a cheap plastic thing, a souvenir from a beach trip. "She wanted you to have this," he said. "She bought it for Sarah. Years ago. She kept it in the box." I took the keychain. It felt heavy in my hand. "We are not going to be the Brady Bunch," Grant said. "I still resent this whole mess. But you are not the enemy. I appreciate that, Grant." We drank our coffee in silence. It was an uneasy, human moment. It wasn't a perfect ending, but it was honest, and after 30 years of lies, honesty felt like a luxury. I left Briar Glen on a Tuesday morning. The sky was a brilliant, aching blue. I drove past the hospital. I didn't look at it. The lawyers would handle the rest. The records would be changed. The history books would be corrected. Gordon Hughes never called. I heard from a cousin that he was living in a condo in Boca Raton, telling anyone who would listen that he had been the victim of a liberal court system. He would never apologize. He would never admit that his protection was just cowardice. I realized, as I merged onto the highway, that I didn't need his apology. I didn't need his confession. Waiting for him to validate me was just another way of letting him control me. I had the truth. I had my name. I had the knowledge that I wasn't a mistake, or a sin, or a scandal. I was a survivor of a broken system. I looked at the passenger seat. The DNA results were there, tucked into a folder. Next to them was the photo of the bracelet, baby girl Miller. I turned up the radio. The road ahead was open and clear. For the first time in 33 years, I wasn't driving toward a lie. I was just driving, and that was enough. Thank you so much for listening to My Dad Called Me the Affair Child for 28 years. A DNA test proved them all wrong. It has been a journey to tell Alice's story, and I hope it resonated with you. I would love to hear your thoughts on the ending. Did Alice make the right choice with Marianne? Do you think justice was truly served? Please leave a comment below and let me know where you are listening from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more dramas about family secrets, betrayal, and the fight for truth, please make sure to subscribe to Revenge Stories. There are many more secrets waiting to be uncovered. Until next time, take care.